Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Well, that is not anybody. What happened there? The Zoom windows are not captured. I set them up, and now they're like, no, we're not going to do that. Hey, everybody, it's us on the fly. It's me and John. John, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, as we quickly adjust some Zoom windows, I don't know why they decided to crap out on us, but they did. Welcome, everybody. So we're back with John. This is a special bonus stream to talk about Fate. And John was on the stream, boy, John, probably over a year ago, I'd say at this point. And we talked at length about Fate and how, John is a big fan of the game. And now there's this big red black box on my screen. I don't even know what's going on. Sorry about this.
It wouldn't be a stream without technical difficulties.
Yeah, I'll tell you. There we go. Okay. I set everything up, and then as soon as it goes live, it craps out. Anyways, so John was on the stream last time because John is a big a Fate believer in Fate, and I think Fate's interesting in the wider RPG context because we talk about gamist games, and we talk about simulationist games, and we talk about narrativist games, and we talk about mechanics. I'm a believer that there's gamist mechanics, there's narrative mechanics, and that sort of informs what the game is. No game is just one thing. That being said, on the spectrum of games, I think Fate is probably one of the strongest narrativist games in existence. I mean, the Fate point is sort of the currency when you think about a narrative meta mechanic to basically say, I want this cool thing that we've decided my character could do to function. Hey, don't you think that your character's, inconvenient aspect, girlfriend, Mary Jane. Oh, of course she's here, right? And, you hand the Fate point over to Spider-Man, and he accepts it as what we call compel. And you're literally, for lack of a better word, you're kind of bribing each other. You're bribing the GM.
Exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, you're bribing the GM with Fate points to sort of say, I think my aspect applies here, and I should get some sort of mechanical bonus or narrative bonus. And then the GM is bribing you as a player. And of course, you need this currency in order to sort of do the thing. And we joke often. We were just joking. In fact, we were just joking about this not that long ago. When we used to play Mutants and Masterminds, which uses hero points, which are similar to Fate in a certain extent. We literally use poker chips, and Smith would literally. This isn't even remotely how the mechanic works, by the way. But imagine in Fate, someone's been earning Fate points, and then they go to do something, and they go, John, I'm all in, and they just slide over 7 Fate points, and you're like, what? You're like, I'm about to say something really ridiculous, and I'm kind of hoping that this pile of chips is enough to bribe you, to convince you to agree with what I'm saying. And some people, and I have found that those games of Mutants and Masterminds and those games of Fate, we use Fate to play a superhero game called the Eerie Avengers, are so good at giving you a very satisfying narrative type experience that you would see in film or movie or something like that.
Yeah, with the gamist, simulationist, and narrative levers, Fate kind of pushes the gamist and simulationist kind of to one direction and then rips the narrative in the other direction, almost comically breaking off like you'd see in a movie. But
yes.
So it's definitely about as close as you can get to full on narrative as you probably can get and still be a game, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, and something we've talked about here a couple of times, which is some people think narrative means that hey, what's up, Whipplestein? $10 super chat.
Hey,
what's going on, Whipple? Big shout out to Whipple, by the way. Been burning the candle at both ends, getting Northern Reaches Season 3 off the ground, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, Whipple. That is awesome. Thank you so much for that. Let's see here. We got some good people here in chat today. We got Ben is here in chat. Ben, who just tipped for a bonus stream. Ben, this is not your bonus stream, by the way. We got more coming in. Pathfinder PhD says, just got some nice glow in the dark Fate dice, blank, flat at line, and EKG spike on the different sides. I haven't seen those. EKG
cool,
line?
Like
is that the plus?
Just share a picture in the Discord if you're in there. I don't know if you want.
How many fake coins to bring upon the rise of the Shell Father? Exactly. That's the kind of stuff that we used to talk about. Like, how can we make this completely ridiculous, and how can we make it come back? But yeah, so I always found it to be a really interesting game. But when we talk about narrative, a lot of people assume it means like. That's why I use the term narrative mechanics, because a narrative game would be like, for example, there's a game called like The Fall of Magic. It's a kind of a famous game. It's kind of expensive. It's a scroll, and you unwield it, and you move your little pawn, and then each little section has questions. There's no dice. It's just about storytelling. Fiasco. You get around, you just tell stories. People go, "Oh, that's a narrative game." I agree with you, but there aren't narrative mechanics. Narrative mechanics are where the game says, "Look, I'm going to create crunch that enforces your character's tropes, the world's tropes." Right? We will talk about the Fate Fractal as it applies to like characters and objects, but the idea of aspects applies not just to things and people, but it can apply to situations. It can apply to campaigns,
ideas and concepts.
Yeah, exactly. So your campaign can have a aspect. Like I could imagine, you're playing Firefly and there's like a campaign aspect, which is like big damn heroes, right? Like so everybody can invoke that at any time, and the GM can compel it at any time. So it's very interesting in that respect.
It's still a game, though. I mean, it's
correct. That's the key.
Any further in the narrative direction, you'd probably end up in a create your own adventure book. But
correct. At that point, it's more of a storytelling game, exercise. Now, Ben, and we'll get to this because I do want to talk about the 3 C's, right? We want to talk about conflicts, challenges and contests. And Ben says, except for the conflict rules, which lean heavily into gamist design. Now, we can start off there if we want, because I have noticed that there's a lot of games. I just noticed this recently. We did a first look. Oh, people in chat. The story path system, right? They came from the Cyclops' Cave, okay, which is a variant of sort of the D10 World of Darkness series games, but they kind of made their own cut of it. And I was reading through it, and I was like, oh, this is very lightweight, but it has a very easy, fun flowing. And then it got to combat. And then it got to a conflict system, and the whole game seemed to grind to a halt because suddenly this fun storytelling narrative game became about tactical combat. And it just feels like you're in 5th gear, and then you're just dropping it down to 1st gear, and it's just such a jarring momentum break. And I experienced this with Legend of the 5 Rings, which is, not at all a narrative game in that respect, but there's gamist and narrative elements, and you're playing the game, and suddenly you go into a conflict mode, and it's like you take a turn, and here's some really itty bitty gritty mechanics. I have always felt that to be a little awkward in Fate. And I think Ben does too. So, John, I'm here.
I have a rebuttal to that. Okay. I was actually gonna put it in the deep dive, but
okay.
I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna save this for the stream.
Okay, good.
I know it's gonna come up.
We're gonna start off right off the bat. This is good.
Okay,
we're coming out.
So
guns blazing.
Let's do a couple scenarios here. If you, what a lot of people do when they first start Fate, and I think the reason this, and even when you read the book, I feel like they don't do a good job of explaining this. So I think, just having very little experience in the system, it's almost natural to feel this way, because what a lot of people do when they enter a conflict is they immediately give the parallel to a combat in D&D or some other game. So they think, oh, I'm in combat mode, I need to be attacking this enemy. What Fate does really well in conflicts, that other systems don't, is that it allows for characters who aren't built around combat to succeed really well. And I think that if you look at combat as less of I'm trying to kill this enemy and everyone is just dumping all the resources and doing that, and instead a conflict is I want to accomplish this goal, then you start to realize the elegance of conflicts. For one, conflicts don't need to be physical. They don't need to be combat. You can have social conflicts where, you're having a heated exchange, you're a heated negotiation with someone, and you're trying to mentally wear them down so that they ultimately concede to your viewpoint. That is technically a conflict in Fate. And there's no attack, there's no physical harm done at all there.
Right,
but also,
and just so people know, in Fate you can take what are called consequences.
right.
And when you would take damage, you can take these consequences, and there's like some empty boxes that you can fill in. And then if you run out of boxes, the last box that you can take is basically that you are taken out.
Yeah.
And what that means depends on the context of the fiction.
Right.
Depends on what kind of conflict that you're playing.
And you can concede ahead of time and say, "There's no way I'm going to win this. I'm going to concede." Because if you concede, you have agency over what happens to your character.
Got it. Okay, so there's kind of,
if you don't concede, it's up to the GM. Now, you're probably not going to die. Like, let's be real. Like, I don't know. A good Fate GM will recognize that death is probably the least interesting thing that can happen to your character. So the odds of your character dying in Fate are pretty slim unless you really do something stupid. But what I wanted to point out was, even in a full-on physical combat traditional sense of the idea, I think that what a lot of people miss in conflict is aspects are extremely relevant because of the create an advantage action. In fact, in a good combat, and if you really want to win a combat, the best way, kind of the meta, I guess you could say, is to have all of your characters kind of do creative advantage actions and stack the free invocations of aspects on their most powerful damage dealer.
Sure.
And then when that person does do an actual attack action, they have all those free invocations that stack on each other, and they can do one crazy physical damage, like physical attack to them. So I think that if you look at it that way, you'll find that the ebb and flow of combat is actually much more interesting and less tactical than it is, I guess, kind of over the top and
yes, because our experience when we played Fate was just like you described, which is that because of the way that the stress system works, you basically want to beat them by a large margin. And so it makes more sense for people just to create this advantage, and then go ham, as you say.
Right. The fun part about creative advantage is and if you don't explain what creative advantage means, then it's going to be very boring. But the fun part about creating advantage is you are putting aspects on them, which means that you are influencing the narrative of the combat. So if you think of combat as less of an exchange of blows and more of a telling of a story, an arc in a story, trying to think of a good example.
Right, but you are trying to win, though.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
But
so I'm saying
that's
to make
kind
it
of
feel more fun than just like a tedious, okay, my turn. If you're actually being explanatory of what you're doing and saying, oh, I'm an archer, right? And I'm shooting this orc in the eye. I'm not actually trying to do physical harm to it, but I'm blinding it, right? I'm giving it the blinded aspect.
Right. And this is where people's, simulationist brains start to melt, right? Which is where they're like, wait a second. Yeah. So you're hitting him with an arrow, but it's not doing damage to him. But it's just giving him the blinded aspect.
Right.
And
which
this
then gives my barbarian a chance, an opening to do an even stronger attack. So
now I will also throw some fuel onto the Fate hate fire, which is you're like, okay, I shot the orc with an arrow using the I describe my action, right? Like I'm taking aim. Maybe it's not an orc because that might be a little, maybe that is a little extreme or something like that. But like a giant, that's a classic thing, right? You shoot the giant's eye out. We can imagine a world in which a giant is a cyclops. Yeah, we can imagine a world in which the cyclops is hit with the arrow and it doesn't die, right?
Right.
But you go, okay, you've created that aspect on the giant, and then someone goes, awesome, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna go take advantage of that while it's blind, and you're like, all right, you can invoke that aspect with a fate point. And they're like, well, I don't have any fate points.
You don't need to use a fate point because when you create an advantage, you get a free invocation.
Let's assume someone else used the free invocation. Yes, I know you get the free invocation thing. Fair. Okay, you're right. You set it up. They're blind. The next guy goes right, and she goes, I'm going to attack him, and I'm going to tag the blinded aspect. I'm going to use the free invocation because it was a new one. And yeah, you know, let him blow. And then the barbarian goes, he's like, yeah, I'm going to hit him too. And you're like, okay, spend your fate point. He goes, well, I don't have a fate point. He's like, well, then he's not blinded to you. And you're like, wait a second, but isn't he blinded? And you're like, yes, in the fiction, he is blinded. And you're like, okay, so is he at disadvantage? And you're like, no, he's not. And you're like, why not? And you're like, because remember earlier when I said that maybe the innkeeper was actually your ex-girlfriend and you said, no, I don't think so. That's why the giant's not blinded, because you don't have any fate points. And that can be very jarring for people.
I can see that. Yeah. I think you have to treat the invocation of aspects not as a narrative thing, but a mechanical thing. And that is a stark digression from what the rest of the system is trying to do. So I can understand that.
Yeah, I like what Nutrimancer says. He is blinded, but it's just not highlighted on camera right now.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you, Nutrimancer. And that is exactly the way that you're supposed to think of it. You're not supposed to think of it in any sort of simulationist sense. You're supposed to think of it in a very, movie sense, right? Where, it's not like, for example, a great example of this is, I remember we were playing Pathfinder 2. It was the first time we ever played. We played that terrible adventure that starts the game. I can't remember what it's called. The first adventure they came with.
Lands of Fandover?
No, that's 5e. That's 5e. That's 5e. God,
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember.
It's the one with the blood ooze and it ends with the alchemist. Yeah. Anyways, at the end, they fight this elven alchemist and what's it called? Shatter Hollow? No, it's got a terrible name. Like the town has like the worst name in the world. It's like, why would you be named that? Anyways, the party like tripped the alchemist and then like grappled her and like flanked her or something like that. And then, you're like, oh yeah, she's held down. It's really cool. And then like someone hit her really big and you're like, and in the movie, like that would be the beat. Right. And then, you'd move on from that. But in Pathfinder 2, she just, she was still prone and she was still like, so there's just like a whole team of people just like, golf clubbing her. And you're like, what would this even look like if this was a movie right now?
Yeah.
Right. And so, Fate's not about that. Beowulf says, can't you just play into the negative side of one of your own aspects, get a fate point, and then spend that to invoke the advantage? I
mean, that's kind of the game, right? You're trying to take advantage of compels to get more, because you only start with 3 at the beginning of the game,
right?
So like you really want to take advantage of as many compels as you can, so you have more fate points to spend on that kind of stuff.
Right, and
that's difficult for people,
right? And Nutrimancer says, kind of, but the negative compel needs to have teeth. There's also this problem. Not saying it's a bad thing, but it is a thing, which is the conflict system tends to put people, it's called conflict, into a sort of us versus them, win or loser type mentality. Yeah. And when you're in that mentality, I've found plenty of players that I've played with over the years in Fate, in Mutants and Masterminds, who are more than willing to accept a compel when, it's a day at the park, and you're just like, oh no, there's that pesky TV news reporter is here to make my hero's life a living hell. But then when suddenly the GM's like, okay, we're using stress rules, we're using harm rules, we're using consequences, we're in a conflict, there's initiative order, there's there's them, there's zones. Suddenly people become much less likely to want to suddenly accept that compel and say,
even outside of conflicts, if the compel is truly compel worthy, like, I don't know. I try not to use compels for like minor, things. I try to really make the compels interesting and actually influence the story in some way.
Sure.
And I feel like when you do that, unless you have a group who really has bought in to this idea of play, that it's going to be hard to get them to accept them. I've actually had many people spend their own fate points to avoid compels, and it's like now it's 3 scenes later and they're down on fate points.
Yeah, so let's kind of change tack here a little bit. And let's talk about that. Like, there's all sorts of different, some of the time, once long ago, it was like the rule. And now I think it's just an optional rule or something like that. But there's this idea of, do you have to make players buy off the compel? So what I mean by that for people at home is like, the GM offers you a compel. They're saying, if I give you a fate point, this aspect of yours is going to cause some problems. And you can say yes or no. And if you say no, no harm, no foul, you just don't get the fate point. But there's another school of thought that says, but if you want to say no, like you can either take the fate point and have something bad happen to you, or you have to spend one of your fate points to avoid having the bad thing happen to you.
Rules is written in Fate Core, condensed, and accelerated. You have to buy it off.
Right.
Now, Fate, as I was mentioning before this, is not a system. It is a framework. So you can kind of do whatever the hell you want with it and whatever your table's most interested in. So
does that raise the skill bar needed for a group to play Fate correctly?
I don't know if it raises the skill bar. I think it takes a certain mentality going into the game that I don't think everyone is willing to engage in.
Got it.
So even though I'm a very I'm a Fate evangelist, for lack of a better term, I do recognize that this is not a game for everyone, and not to say some people can't become interested in this kind of play, but I think that if somebody is, only played more traditional games, it is kind of a bit of a barrier of entry to a lot of people. So whenever someone asks me, will I like Fate, or I'm playing my first Fate game, what should I know? The first piece of advice I always give them is forget everything you know about tabletop RPGs and go into it completely blind. Because it really is so different than like a traditional tabletop RPG that unless you go into it completely open-minded, you're going to face a lot of resistance. So
I need to find this fantastic I got found it. I need to somehow save this file. I found this. I got a thing sent to me, which was which was like the Fate character sheet from our last Fate game, and the different aspects that people had. It was pretty classic. All right, so Beowulf here, who is saying the rules say you don't even have to have an aspect compelled to get a fate point. It just needs to cause you trouble. So even if it's not officially compelled, I agree. I mean, that's like compelling after the fact, right? I mean, it was still essentially compelled, right? If you made that thing cause trouble, but that's the key there. What does cause you trouble mean? You say as long as it's a significant disadvantage, you get a fate point.
I actually don't know if that's true. I think you do have to compel, like the compel has to be founded in an aspect, but the situation, you compel an aspect, but the situation is what determines whether the aspect is relevant or not, right? I'd have to look at the rules again, but as far as I know, the compel does have to be rooted in an aspect. I don't know, Ben, you just did a deep dive. Did you find that wording particularly confusing in there?
Everyone's like, what is Derek doing? And I'm like, I'm trying to take a screenshot of this thing because it was on my phone, unfortunately.
I will say that, and Ben and I kind of went back and forth with this in his deep dive, in that the Fate, I'd say core in particular, the Fate core rules sometimes don't do the best job at describing things, despite spending a lot of words to describe things. So yeah. I think Fate Condensed does a lot better job there, as it's more succinct.
Fate Condensed. Now that is the one I'm not as familiar with. I'm more familiar with Fate Accelerated Edition.
I mean, even Fate Accelerated, I think, does a better job than Fate Core. I think Fate Core tries to be overly fluffy in some areas, and its description of things to its detriment sometimes.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, I just thought this would be a fun little share here. So this is oh no, that's not an image, it's a browser. This was our last Fate game that we played. This was called the Eerie Avengers, and this was the 1980s era
pulp
superheroes. That's right. We got them on the screen here. So we
I don't have the stream up, so I can't.
Oh, okay. That's all right. I don't know if there's a way I can easily share it with you, but so we have the atomic. We have the Atomic Hobo, the Blue Barracuda, the Illusionator, Joe Armstrong, and Tesla. And this was from a Fate system called Strands of Fate. And that's why, so in this game, you had your defining aspect, your ambition aspect, your background aspect, your conviction, and your disadvantage, A, B, C, D. And so this was the idea of like having aspects that felt those. And then you had your skill, your foe, your gear, your inferior skill, and then if you had any other aspects. But you can see that we had some, strange characters in this situation, considering one of the characters was Nikola Tesla. You also had Joe Armstrong, who was the American Ninja rock star, and then the Illusionator, who was an immortal wizard like that looked like Gandalf, but who rode a motorcycle and did stunts. You also had a vigilante mobster and an atomic hobo. But
sounds like a fun game to me.
But here's the thing: like this page of aspects was all I needed to really put together a entire campaign, and kind of think about like, well, my players are just telling me what they care about and what they want to interact with, and so now I just know what to do, and I could just do this over and over again, and give constant element. They wouldn't have picked those if that's not what they wanted, so it's like, for me, it was like playing on easy mode, because I could just tell them, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay, everything's going on. What's happening? Oh, Blue Barracuda, conviction, defender of the weak, especially women and kids. It's like, oh, well, you discover that there's an orphanage, that might be affected by the bomb blast, and he's like, no, I have to go defend the kid. And it's like, okay, cool, here's your fate point. You're just coming up with excuses to give people the fate point.
It's interesting because I don't know if people ever thought about this, but why are aspects called aspects? It's because in storytelling, when they teach you, like, you go to college or something for storytelling or writing or something, aspects are actually a fairly standard term for the things you use to create the story. Like when you create a character, you create aspects on those characters, and when you create stories, like, this is not like something unique to Fate. This is actually a storytelling terminology. So that's where a lot of these terms came from, that's the game is rooted ultimately in storytelling. So
Artist here says, hey all, finally managed to catch the beginning of the stream. I've tried flipping through Fate before, but found it a bit hard to decipher. Hope this stream will clarify a couple things. Fate is full of jargon. There can be no doubt about that. So
I would actually recommend, if you are having trouble like parsing through Fate Core in particular, I would definitely take a look at either or both Fate Accelerated or Fate Condensed. They're much more succinct version. I mean, Fate Condensed is really just Fate Core with some minor changes to things, but it's written in 60 pages instead of 200 and odd pages or whatever. So it makes it a lot more easy. Like I said, Fate Core in particular is very fluffy and very hard to decipher in some ways.
Yeah,
Accelerated and Condensed do a much better job of explaining things.
I mean, obviously, I've talked on this. I've talked on this channel before, but I think Fate Accelerated Edition, which is like it's for free, or you can buy it's like $5 for like the little thin pamphlet. I mean, I don't even know if I have it.
I think both Fate Accelerated and Condensed are both like 60 pages or something.
Yeah, I mean, they're
very
super, super tight. And I was just seeing if I had it back there, but it's like, I mean, it's literally this thin. But I think that is a much clearer way of addressing the way that Fate is approaching the game. And one of the things that we could actually talk about, one of the things that's different, I'm curious how you think, and I know how I think, John. Let me see if I can bring this up. I don't remember. I don't actually know if this is like 100% accurate, but so when you make a Fate character, Fate does not have what we would call ability scores. Right. It has
skills,
approaches. And the way that these skills work is that it's a numerical bonus. You're going to roll your 4 dice fudge, or 4 dice Fate, I guess they call it now, but I call them fudge dice still. And then that will generate a number between -4 and +4, which is basically usually going to be around a -1 to +1. There's not a lot of variance in that base because it is pretty unlikely that you're going to roll those high ones. And now, so Beowulf says, so this is where I was getting at. Let me see if I can find what is going on, man. It's a weird day.
I'm guessing this is going towards using approaches versus skills.
You got it. So I was trying to bring up a picture of the Fate skill pyramid, but it is not working. So good times. So in Fate, your character will have a number of skills, and the way that it works is it's like a pyramid where you have a couple of skills that are like at +1 or +2. Then you have a fewer that are at +3, and then you might have like one skill that is at like +4, two skills at +4, one skill at +5. So you have this pyramid of values. And one of the things that's really neat about Fate is this skill list is totally customizable for your game. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So if you really wanted your game to be about vehicles and stuff like that, you could have a driving skill and a pilot skill because you want to distinguish between the two different, and a boating skill if you really wanted to get into it. On the other hand, if your game isn't really concerned about the nitty-gritty of that, you might just have a vehicles skill. Or maybe you don't have that skill at all, and it just kind of is not a thing that you're kind of expecting to do. So by customizing a skill list, you're sort of telling your players what they want to do or how they want to do it. Now, the reason I bring this up is because in Fate Accelerated Edition, they do not use skills. They use approaches, and there's usually just 5 of them. And approaches don't say what you're doing. They say how you do it. So rather than saying you're good at guns or you're good at boating or you're good at hacking or you're good at tech, the approaches says you're good at doing things forcefully. You're good at doing things quickly or quietly or smartly, all right, or cleverly, or charmingly. And what you can do is kind of anything, or it's sort of dependent on what your character's background is, and we kind of accept that, okay, your character would know how to drive a car, or your character would know how to fly a plane. But what we really are interested in is in the description of how you're doing that. I have found approaches to be far more beneficial at getting people to make the leap between mechanics and description, because it innately tells them to add this adjective or to convince us all that you're doing this thing forcefully by describing it forcefully, and doing it in a way that makes sense in the narrative. And whereas like once we have drive, you're kind of just like, well, I'm driving, and it doesn't, you could tell us how you're driving. But at the end of the day, if you're behind a vehicle, you're driving the car and you're just making a drive check. And I have found that the approaches aspect is so much better at getting people to actually describe, as Burning Wheel would say, describe to live, and get them to really engage with it. So Beowulf said skills, greater aspects. I don't know if I agree with that. But yeah, John, what do you think?
I have a few thoughts here. First, I don't think either is better than the other. I think some games work better with one versus the other. The thing about approaches is that there are inherently a lot less approaches than skills.
Right.
So what you end up with is characters that are much more similar to one another. Now,
yes.
For certain kinds of games, this is actually what you want. Like, for instance, a high school drama game in the real world, you probably would be better off with approaches, because you're all just normal human students and you all have reasonably similar skills. So I think that this kind of style is better suited for that kind of game. Now, for a sci-fi game where you have a bunch of different alien races and you have characters of vastly different backgrounds and vastly different skill sets, I think skills probably make for a more interesting game. You also get more diverse characters because there are more permutations of skills that you can have as a character. So I don't think one is necessarily better than the other overall. Now, I think what you alluded to was that approaches are better for new people getting into the game.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think so, because I think it's much easier to just say, assume a level of competence, use your use the character's description, traits, aspects to sort of inform what they're capable of doing. But then really to ask the player, well, how are you doing this?
Yeah.
And of
I
course,
can see your argument there. I personally, I don't use straight approaches as often as I use skills, so I don't have as many data points to compare them to. So me personally, I haven't noticed much of a difference. But I can see the argument you presented as being truthful.
Like Beowulf says, the reason I like skills is precisely because it helps distinguish characters and makes each one unique. Strange, that is not a concern of mine. In fact, I feel like skills exist in a game like Dungeons and Dragons to pigeonhole characters into those niches, and I kind of don't want to do that. I want to allow players the opportunity to be able to kind of participate, in almost anything. And the way that you distinguish your character is through those aspects. I think
now, I do have one other thought to add to this, and this is kind of throwing a wrench into everything.
Okay.
There's an idea that isn't core to any of the editions of Fate, whether it's accelerated core or condensed, but was proposed, I guess, in an issue of the old Fate magazine called the Fate Codex, and I think is becoming very popular now, and one that I have personally subscribed to, and pretty much most, if not all, of my Fate games that I've played in the last several years. And that is the idea of combining both skills and approaches.
Oh,
and what you end up with is a system that is much more similar to, say, Legend of the Five Rings.
That's very similar to Legend of the Five Rings. Yeah.
And I find that this is kind of the best of both worlds. Now, it does take a little bit of work because, there are some combinations of approaches and skills that don't really make sense, like sneaky thievery, right? Well, it's thievery. It's inherently sneaky. So what I do in a situation like this, I'll just drop or actually a better example, sneaky stealth, right? Well, you're using stealth. You're obviously being sneaky. Like that's inherent in the word stealth, right? So I would just drop stealth and just say, oh, you're doing sneaky something else, like if it's being stealthful, you would use the sneaky approach with whatever skill you're trying to do. I find that this creates even more variation in characters, but also kind of keeps that approach like an oriented play that you're looking for. So in my opinion, it's the best of both worlds.
Well, I actually think you kind of highlighted something there, though, which is that approaches eliminate the need for quite a few skills, because a lot of skills are just describing doing something in a certain way.
Yeah.
Right. Talking very, talking in a very persuasive manner, or moving very quietly, you're just moving, so and so you can actually sort of condense those concepts down into much more broader packages. Right. And then use approaches to sort of fill in the gaps and fill in the sort of
It also lets people, if you do have two characters who are, equally as competent in, I don't know, say shooting or fighting, it lets you still have diversity in how they approach their goals, right?
Right. But as an example, let's just say that you had a generic skill in Fate called, and we're talking John's crazy thing here. So you have a generic skill, because at that point the skill becomes about the intent, right? So let's say that you had a skill essentially called movement.
Yeah.
Well, doing a sneaky movement, that's stealth, right? Doing a careful movement, well, that's like balancing.
Yeah.
Right? Doing a flashy movement, well, that's like doing acrobatics. Doing a forceful movement, well, that's
Leroy
like a big
Jenkins.
that's a big leap across a pit. So you can use the approaches plus one skill to basically create almost 5 or 6 skills worth that we would normally associate with it, because we're just talking about the skill, or in this case, it's not really a skill, movement. It's more of like, what is the intention, and then how are you doing it?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very powerful combination for sure.
Yeah, so this is becoming really popular in the Fate sphere. Like I said, it's nothing in any of the rule books. It's just something some random dude in a magazine came up with, and people have caught on to it.
So Daryl says everybody does magic. Nah, not for me. No, everybody definitely doesn't do magic. In fact, your Fate game may not even have magic.
Yeah.
There's no.
In fact, magic is actually one of those things that's actually surprisingly difficult to do well in Fate. There are ways to do it,
Sure,
but fancy in magic is not something that you're probably gonna.
No way.
Succeed at in Fate.
No way. Absolutely. In fact, I would say that magic could be a little underwhelming in Fate because it tends to just be an aspect called like trained at the school of wizardry, you know, and you can just kind of.
And in doing magic, you're not like as concerned with the actual effects of it, and more of that's just the way you're accomplishing your goal kind of deal. So like, you know, you're casting fireball, you know, you're not blowing up, you're not gonna like do splash damage or all this stuff to a bunch of people. You're just gonna narratively rain down some fireballs and you create an advantage. Right. Or something,
right. Well, and so that is that's another complaint that people could have where, you know, there's this again, I've talked about this all the time and I wish I could find it because it's like some old it's a cartoon I saw, you know, like back in like the 80s when you'd watch cartoons and they just had all those like different cartoons. And it was like one of those like fake documentary cartoons where they're like, here we see the U.S. Postal Mail Service. There's a hard-working postal service, Martin. And it's this person, and they're like taking all these letters, and they're like putting it into like 100 different slots, you know, to organize them. And then like the cartoon camera pans, and they're all just going into like one big bucket. And the reason I bring that up is because sometimes it can be frustrating in Fate. I mean, I know I'm big devil's advocate here, but you know, you're like, I blah 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 blah, and the GM's like, awesome. Create an advantage, and then like somebody else goes, I rain fire and I blah 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 blah, and you're like, create an advantage. Like everything gets boiled down to basically overcome an obstacle, create an advantage, whatever the attack one is, and like and then defend, right? So it can be a little frustrating because everything gets boiled down to just this one sort of root thing.
But that's the elegance of it, because everything.
No, you're right.
You boiled down into that.
So. You are, and as a GM, it's very simple. You go, which of the 4 buckets does this go into? Right? Are you trying to overcome this obstacle? Are you trying to create an advantage, or are you trying to deal with the problem directly? Boom, boom, boom. Simple, easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
It does have a kind of an interesting side effect, though, in that it unintentionally solves the problem of. You know, that's common in like Pathfinder or D&D, where magic users typically become kind of more powerful in the later levels than martial users. Whereas it kind of flattens the curve with Fate, because magic isn't like, it's not some stupid powerful thing. It's just a flavor of how you're doing your task.
It's just the flavor, right? Like someone who had, you know, as like a core identity, right? You know, trained battle mage of the seventh circle is going to have as much impact on the game as someone who has, you know, trained swordsman of the Crimson Order. And it's going to be basically as kind of effective. I mean, obviously there's going to be situations, you know, because that's another unspoken thing about Fate, which doesn't get talked a lot about. And by the way, if you're interested in like learning the basics of Fate, we did one. By the way, someone looked up, it was like Livestream number 45 or something. So that was a long time ago. As we come up on number 300, so 250 streams ago. You know, sometimes you can hurt people's feelings, you know, because, you know, they try to explain how this aspect helps them. And maybe they're trying to be a dick, and they're trying to make it apply to every single thing. But sometimes you're like, no, that's just bad. That was just that. No, I'm sorry. You can't, your aspect doesn't apply here. No, like it just doesn't. And it can create this kind of like womp, womp, womp moment when you have players who are really fumbling with the narrative, and they really want a +2, and they're looking at their aspects, and they've got fate points, and they're like, I don't know. You know, whereas like a game like Pathfinder 2 or 5e, you don't have to explain anything. You don't have to explain how you're great weapon fighting. You don't have to explain how you got lucky. You just go click the button, you know, click the button, my effect happens. I took the feat, I took the thing, it works. You know, I don't have to try to explain myself to the group or to the GM. And I think some people feel very, very, very like threatened by that style of play. Now, I think it elevates your style of play because it forces you to engage in the fiction, which is the entire point of a role-playing game. But some people find that very difficult. Some people find that very challenging. Some people find that very uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's actually funny because that notion is actually coded into the rules of the book, and they have an explicitly written rule called the bogus rule, which when I read it was kind of funny because it's very archaic terminology. Like, what is this, like the 70s? Like, who uses the word bogus anymore? But also because like bogus is a synonym for basically stupid. And it's like, you're basically saying, and like the rule says, like, if the table doesn't agree with it, just yell, "That's bogus." And I'm like, you're basically saying, "Nah, dude, that's stupid." What
you suck. That's what you just. and I've played. Most of the time I've played Fate has been like cons, and I've seen it before where, you know, people are playing. Maybe they're playing Fate for the first time, and you got a GM, and you know, and like this person is just this. Their description is terrible, you know, like, but they're really trying, and the GM's like, yeah, okay, yeah, all right. How about you just give me the fate point and we'll just give you a +2.
What does everyone else think of
what does everyone else think? And everyone else is like cringing, like they couldn't believe. They're just like, yeah. So, you know,
I think that does highlight also the importance of having good aspects from the beginning, though.
Yes.
And that in itself is very much an art form.
Now, I think Core, well, I know Accelerated does this, but I think Core is really good about this, where it basically says, or Accelerated is good about this, but I don't know if Core, but like Accelerated is like, come up with your core identity, you know, your main problem or whatever this, and then, you know, leave some of your other aspects blank. You can always fill them in, fill them out during play. I love that. Like that is like so great because you may not know, and then you start playing and you realize you're like, oh, can I like be a part of that order, you know, of knights? And you're like, yeah, absolutely, go ahead, throw that down as an aspect. You're like, cool, great.
A lot of people complain that it ends up kind of slowing down or kind of making a weird pause and play, but I'm like, I don't know. To me, that's like part of the game, so it's like I don't see that as a problem necessarily, but it is a complaint of some people. Okay, sorry. No.
I'm reading chat here.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I actually encourage that in my games, because I find that it ends up creating more interesting characters in the long run.
Absolutely.
I actually don't like when people come to the session 0 in Fate with a predetermined character, because part of the fun thing about Fate is tying your characters together, and I don't think you can do that if you're creating them in a vacuum. Now with Discord, what I've been doing a lot is before session 0, maybe a session -1, I don't know. I kind of just have everyone in a group chat and we're like, hey, what are you guys thinking for characters? How can you tie it together? Things like that. And then we come to session 0 with like some ideas, and then we kind of use that as guidelines for what we build.
I will say Fate is probably one of the best games to use a collaborative world building process, because then everyone at the table is very tied into the world, and when they make their characters and they make their aspects, they know what elements everybody else has talked about. They know what elements everyone else has bought into. They know what elements are existing in your game, what elements you all decided were important because you made them up during your, you know, course of your game. So
it doesn't necessarily mean you need to come with you can have a setting you want to use too. Like if you want to do Lord of the Rings game, you can do that.
Right.
But it gives you a lot of freedom in, you know, what era of Lord of the Rings, you know, what
Fate's a very generic
conflict. It's like Fate, you can go kind of wild with it. And in fact, part of character building is also building the character of the campaign and the character of the game. So I'm kind of alluding to the Fate Fractal there, but you know, you are going to be coming up with aspects for the game, for the campaign, for your initial session, all that stuff. So you really want to go into session 0, and I'd say Fate is really one of the games where session 0 is probably most important as well, because the game can hardly function without some form of collaborative introduction. So
real quick, Woodland Fellowship said having a specific skill list may be helpful for some players, especially new ones, to inspire ideas of what kind of things they could try. generically, that is true, and that has always been sort of the advice. My problem with that is I want them to feel like they can do anything, you know? And more importantly than that, I want them to think about it through the lens of their character. So if their character is a trained assassin of the Ebb and Order, then when they go to do something, I want them to be thinking about, well, is this something that a trained assassin of the Ebb and Order can do? Yeah, I don't want you to be thinking about what's on my character sheet. You know, this is an opportunity. Fate is really an opportunity to really blend those lines between a storytelling game and a role-playing game.
Yeah. What you described is the difference between what I like to call description versus prescription.
Yes.
And it's something it's awfully commonly known as fiction first. And I think that notion is probably the common denominator of every good narrative focused RPG. But I think Fate takes it just to the extreme. So
yeah. That's right. Is this descriptive or is it prescriptive? Does it tell you how you're doing something, or does it tell you specifically what you can do?
Yeah.
And obviously, Pathfinder 2 or something like that is pretty prescriptive. It's like, do you have this feat? Yes or no? And some people will say, but you can play it descriptive. You could just do whatever you want with the game. And that is true.
I mean, I can do whatever I want with anything.
Yeah, that's my point.
It's actually going to work out the best.
Right. I could turn Monopoly into a role-playing game if I tried hard enough. So I do agree with Woodland here that, that it could be helpful because, well, what can I do? And I think the classic refrain is, well, it's a role-playing game. You could do anything. And I think a better question, and these are the kind of questions, I think for me, GMing is all about asking good questions. I know that's kind of crazy, and I don't think I've talked about this a little bit, but when someone says, I give a challenge, and I'm like, and what do you do? And they're like, well, what can I do? And I said, well, you're a master swordsman, right, of the Silver Order. What would you do in this situation? What do you think you're capable of? And they're like, I don't know. Maybe I'd fight my way past the guy. Okay, let's try that. Asking them questions that force them to answer through the lens of their character is for me the best way to root people in the fiction. And then Frostjack asks, by the way, what does it mean to be good at movement? I don't know. The same thing it means to be good at perception. What does being good at perception mean? I don't.
This is completely orthogonal, but I just had a great merch idea for you.
Okay.
Those, I don't know how old all your chat members are, but you remember back like in the day where we had those bracelets, like what would Jesus do?
WWJD.
WWJD. You should make one that says WWYD. What would you do?
We used to, I don't know if they ever made I don't know if this was a shirt. This is how, getting old sucks. I don't remember if this was actually a thing or if it was just a joke that my friends and I had, but, we got a big tip coming in from Javier.
Javier tipped $75. It's past due for all the live streams I haven't caught. I guess it was fate that I happened to catch this stream.
Javier with a $75. Woo. Big, huge one. Thank you, 70.
You were joking about the Monopoly, man.
I know. Javier saying that this is past due. You're never past due, Javier. It's very appreciated. I should never feel obligated, but I really appreciate it. For all the live streams I haven't caught, I guess it was fate that I happened to catch this one. That's awesome. Thank you, Javier. That's amazing, and I do appreciate a good pun as well. Javier, that's amazing. Thank you so much. What I was saying before Javier rudely interrupted us with his incredible generosity was that we had a idea for like WWGGD, like what would Gary Gygax do?
Oh,
and I don't know if that ever got made into it. Like if that was our idea or if that was something we saw. But let me see here. I don't think I looked up WWGGD on Google and it doesn't come up. So maybe that was just our idea, but it was what would Gary Gygax do? And I think it was like maybe before he died or after he died, but we were just like, everyone's dead, save versus death. Maybe. But yeah, so I certainly appreciate the value of skills. I also think skills are valuable, in telling your players a bit more about your campaign. If you come in and you have 4 different skills for different level, like if you have a skill for manipulator and a skill for, deception, and you have a skill for diplomacy and you have a skill for influence and you have a skill for persuade, you're like, okay, there's going to maybe be a lot of different social actions in this game, and there's a lot of distinction between this. On the other hand, if you have a skill just called social, you're like, okay, I get it. Like, this campaign's maybe mostly going to be about, two-fisted adventure, flying by biplanes, fighting Nazi robots. Got it. Like, we're not as concerned about breaking up and compartmentalizing these things. So skills do I think, a great job of kind of helping your players understand what is going to be in this game and what isn't going to be in this game.
Another thing I find players have trouble with is wealth in Fate, because wealth is very different than, for one, it may not exist at all. Like, you may just completely hand wave anything related to buying and selling stuff or whatever, or by rules as written, you have the resource skill. It's like, how good am I at scrounging up the money to buy this thing or whatever. So like, I'm going
to do a poll here because we're playing Torchbearer with the patrons, and the Torchbearer has an abstract wealth mechanic. It's called the resources mechanic. So what is your resource value? How do you feel? This is the poll question. How do you feel about abstract resource mechanics, like a value or a skill, versus actually having like track gold and how much dollars you have? So we got love it, like it, it's okay, dislike it, and we can only put 4.
So this is a game called Interface Zero, which originally was its own system, then did like a Pathfinder rendition, and then it's a Fate version of it. And they did something in this I thought I've never seen in another Fate game, and I thought was very clever, being a cyberpunk based game, is that they use the typical resource mechanics of like can you afford this thing, but they also have, we haven't talked about stress tracks yet, but they have a dedicated stress track called a resource stress, and it basically encapsulates how far in debt are you, and as you like accomplish missions, you get a wealth parcel, and you can kind of relieve that debt, which I thought was very fitting for a cyberpunk game. Debt is a very common
right. You're trying to work your way out of Hawk to the man.
I thought that was very clever use of custom stress tracks, which are mentioned as something, a lever you can pull in your games, but are not used as common as I would think they should be.
So 47% like it, 29% love it, and only 11% think it's okay or dislike it. So, and we mentioned this before, and I think this is something that I personally really like about Fate, which is, again, I say I like it. I love it, I love it when I'm playing the game, and I hate it when I'm not playing the game. We kind of danced around the idea of the Fate Fractal, right? The idea of like consequences and stress isn't just a character thing. So for those of you who may not be aware of it, the idea is that everything in Fate can be represented the same way. Oh, you have a starship? Guess what? It has skills. It has aspects. It has harm or stress. It has consequences, right? Just like your character. Now, you might say, "Oh, so what? Like my character can go punch a starship to death?" And that's again where the simulationist, minds explode. And you're like, "Well, no, obviously not. If you shot your laser pistol at the starship, the GM wouldn't even have you roll, because in the fiction you haven't, done enough." But I mean, there might be some rules about scale or size if they really want to get crunchy with it. But what's really powerful about that is everybody knows how everything works all the time. And that is so powerful when you're playing a game, because you don't have to be like, let's bust out this new meta, this whole new subsystem about how starships work that is completely different from how our characters work. And you're like, oh, but what? Okay, so things. Well, no, but it could also represent organizations. It can represent movements. It can represent buildings. It can represent basically anything. And that is so powerful when you're playing the game.
Items.
Because everybody gets it. Now, I say I love it when I'm playing, because then it's fast, it's quick, everybody gets it. But when I'm not playing the game, I'm kind of like, oh, this is so repetitive and boring, right? But the fact is like, as much as I love complex and all these new books and stuff like that, the fact is when you're playing at the game book or the game, you're playing hot, you're under the fire, suddenly trying to remember how some abstract system works is tough. And Jake hits it right here on the nose. You know, one of the things that we joke about with Pathfinder 2 and 5e too, but really all D20 games. But, you know, nowadays when a new game comes out, one of the first things we say is like, oh, all right, yeah, with this fun loosey-goosey system, here come the 20 different conditions, and they all work differently. Are you on fire? Are you frozen? Are you shocked? Are you dissolving? Oh, each one has different rules, and you got to. When you're playing Fate, and you've got your zones, and I've played a lot of Fate, and I've run a lot of Fate at cons, and I get my 3x5 note card, and I just write down "on fire" with a Sharpie, and I throw it down onto the zone. Everybody understands what that means, you know, because everybody knows how aspects work. That's how the game works. And so now, rather than have to have specific rules for, well, how does the fire work, and how much is it, D10 persistent damage and DC 15 check, and then if you're on fire, what happens? No, you just go, it's on fire, and everyone goes, I get it, it's on fire. I think that's so powerful.
The designers of Fate have gone on record to say that one of the core pillars of, you know, when designing the system or framework, whatever you want to call it, is that they wanted it to get out of your way. They wanted you to be able to just tell your stories, engage with the system, and not feel like you're fighting the system or trying to remember a archaic, bespoke rule for this one thing that happens once in a blue moon kind of deal.
Now, as you say that, it's time for me to shit on Fate Core again, because that is exactly why I don't like the free invoke and the boosts and spin. And I don't like any of that. I hate those rules. I just hate those rules so much. Because now I got to track all this. Now it's like a meta currency for my meta currency. You know, like I find it to be very, very, very frustrating. Yeah. Like, to be clear, this isn't a Fate thing. When I'm playing Powered by the Apocalypse and someone's like, oh, you have +1 ongoing or +1 forward. I hate that too. I mean, that's old tech that they don't really use anymore, but I hate it. Because I don't want to remember that, and I don't want to track that. Now, you know, what I did a lot of times when I was playing at a con is if someone created a new aspect, you know, they invoked it or whatever, or, they created it, I would put the card down, and then I would take one of my poker chips, which represent fate points, and I'd put it on the card to represent that, like, that first free compel was there. But boost and spin, I think those are the same thing, but they gave them different names now.
That's interesting.
But I don't like those.
I find that to be one of the most elegant things of Fate, and why it really makes Creative Advantage work. I don't think Creative Advantage could work as a mechanic without the free invocation thing. I mean, I guess it would still give you that create the situational aspect, so it wouldn't be completely for naught. But interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can see your argument there for sure.
Yeah, and so it's just, for me, I just think it's much simpler, and I get it. Like, people think, I mean, basically what it comes down to is people didn't feel like creating an advantage was worth
beneficial
it.
enough.
Yeah, it wasn't worth it enough. And
because I guess we didn't directly say this, we probably should, is that when in combat or in conflict or in challenge or in contest, actually for challenges and contests, I don't think it's true, but for conflict at least, creating an advantage basically means you can't do anything else that turn. So
right, you basically get one thing, you know, to do in your turn.
And movement's free as long as you're within the single zone. But
spin is the old term for when you beat something by 3 or more.
If you go back to our previous stream, I believe Derek shared like a diagram of like the lineage of Fate.
Yes.
And how very different versions there were.
Let's see if I can find it really quick. Yeah, I remember there was that great. Yeah,
it's seen several evolutions over the years.
Yeah. I think it's actually like on like their main.
Oh, is it?
On their like website. Yeah. So this is just from Evil Hat. You know, so you've got.
Yeah, Fate, it doesn't have all the third party.
Yeah. So you got Fate version 1 from 2000, Fate version 2 from 2003. Then you got 2006, which is Fate 3. And this had Spirit of the Century. And this is where I first learned the game, which was Spirit of the Century and kind of in that era of like Legacies of Anglaire or Legends of Anglaire, Star Blazer Adventures. And then as sort of a spin-off from this, you had Strands of Fate, which is what I actually have played the most as my home games. And then you could see all the different versions of Fate. They haven't done themselves any favor here with with all the different versions, I will admit.
I often joke and say it uses the Windows versioning because it went from like just Fate to like Fate 3. It's like, what happened to Fate 2 and Fate 1?
Right.
So it's like
yeah, but like the old original Fate was very, very, that was tough. But like the newer versions of Fate are much more avoidable. I really do think
the very original was Dresden Files before it was even called Fate. It was just Dresden Files RPG, and Fate was born out of that. So, from my understanding,
no, because Fate was derived from Fudge, and
right, but I think Fudge was derived from Dresden Files, wasn't it?
No, Fudge I think predates even the Dresden Files. Maybe even like the series. I think Fudge is from like the early mid late 90s. It was like free form universal dice game engine, I think is what Fudge originally stood for. And then it kind of got backronymed into something. Nutrimentor says
was effed up gaming engine, but
Nutrimentor says there was Fate 1 and Fate 2.0. Fate 3 was a skipped version, but it's the one that officially got released as Spirit of the Century and Dresden Files. Spirit of the Century is a lot of fun, by the way. Really cool. It's like, it's the whole premise is that
it makes me think of I don't remember the South Park episode with the Underpants Gnomes. It's like step 1, like Fate 1 is this, Fate 3 is this. What about Fate 2? I don't know. Fate 3 is Prophet.
Yeah, Fate 3 is Prophet. Spirit of the Century is really cool. It's like pulp action, turn of the century. The idea is that like your characters were like born like in 1900, right? Or like 1901. Like you were born at the beginning of the century. And so like you represent the hope of a new century, and your characters are now it's the late 20s, your Indiana Jones era, and you're going and doing all the pulp action.
But I will say, I will give Fate, they weren't afraid to break out of the norm when it came to settings for Fate, for sure. They have some very, very unique,
and they're very customizable, and it's a very generic system, and you can do a lot with it.
So like how many RPGs are doing that kind of stuff?
So this is actually going to surprise some people. I want to ask you a question on this, John. What are your thoughts about Fate as a game for a long-term campaign? And I mean like
define long-term, I guess would be.
Let's go with 50 plus sessions.
No, probably not. I think you could do it. I feel like it would take a lot of effort to keep it fresh, though.
Yeah. This is going to shock people, all right? Because
but also I don't want a 50-session campaign anymore.
Well, some people. Well, no. I mean, listen. Let me put that. I want that.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't, because I know what's going on in my life and how hard it is to get things. But I wish more than anything that I could do that. But
I struggle to make it a 4-session.
Right. Right. This channel knows that I hate one-shots. And part of the reason I don't like one-shots is because I feel like, number one, a lot of the games are based on this idea of progression and not like just leveling up, but like seeing your character sort of change and develop over time. I also feel like, you don't get a good chance to really see the mechanics in action in one session for a lot of games. Fate is probably my favorite game for one-shots and for pre-gens, because you can sit down and you can play Fate and tell a great story and really get to like play to the strengths of your character and sit back. And when you're done, your group can look back and look at the story that you created. Not maybe as much about the character, but it's about the story that you did. And you could see how you, as the player and your fellow players, shaped that through your compels and through your invokes. And that's a very satisfying experience. Progression in Fate is, in my opinion, kind of shitty anyways. Because like I think that the game becomes a lot less interesting if your skills get really high up anyways. It's just like Powered by the Apocalypse. Once you have like a bunch of +3s or +4s in Dungeon World, the game becomes very uninteresting.
In my opinion, Fate's progression, the more interesting part of it is the changing of aspects and
right,
maybe like the addition of stunts. But the skill progression is. I honestly, I could see a a game of Fate where you just don't even get skill increases.
So let's talk about that. How do you feel about stunts? So, real quick, for people at home, stunts are something that you buy with your refresh. Refresh is how many fate points you start the session with. When you have a stunt, it's basically a, for lack of a better words, feat. It's like a thing that you can do, and you sometimes can only do it like once a session, or sometimes if it's very powerful, or sometimes it's like when I'm doing something very specifically, and this situation, I get a +2 to bonus to the roll. That's usually how stunts are.
Or it lets me use a skill that normally wouldn't be used.
What do they call those things in? Oh crap! There's a term for those in Pathfinder 2, where you open up a different skill. Like it lets you use nature for medicine checks.
Yeah.
Skill access. I don't know what else to call those, but yeah, you can use
Skill
this.
feats.
Yeah, but like there's a type of skill feat where you can just allows you to use a different feat or different skill for a different use. How do you feel about stunts in Fate?
I like them. I mean, I like anything that gives diversity to characters and gives them a feeling of they're improving.
I hate
in
stunts.
Fate, like you said, it's kind of I assume so when you pose the question, but I don't know. I have mixed feelings of them. I like them, but I also think the game would probably be better if you just allow people to do whatever the fuck they want with whatever skills they had. And
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
think it's that much of a difference.
some of this comes back to like the approaches and stuff like that. But I just feel like the aspect element of the game is so strong that having stunts feels like it's a way to kind of cop out.
Yeah.
And basically, you're buying out. You're literally buying out because it's costing you fate points at the beginning of the session with the refresh.
Yeah.
So that you can do this thing without having to engage in the fate point economy. But the whole point is I want to engage in the fate point economy. That's why I'm here.
I don't know. I'd have to think about that one. I haven't honestly never really thought too deeply about it. Because I mean, for one, some stunts, if they're particularly powerful, they might actually cost you another fate point just to use the stunt. But also stunts are typically tied to aspects, so like you can't use the stunt unless your aspect applies in a certain situation. So I don't know. I honestly don't have a good answer to that question. I can see your viewpoint, and like I said, I feel like stunts are kind of unnecessary, an unnecessary addition to the game. Like I feel like they exist because of a limitation of the system that could probably just go away entirely. But
well, to me, right, because let's take stunts to their like extreme end where you have 0 refresh and you have a bunch of stunts.
Yeah.
And you're like, aren't I just playing 5e D&D then? Like where I don't have any fate.
Yeah.
I don't have any fate points.
As a GM, you sort of have a bit of an obligation to discourage that, or responsibility. Less an obligation. But
oh shit, we got Nutrimancer in chat. Me too. We call it season 2 and so on. We got to a second and sometimes third in Nova Praxis. Hell yeah, somebody actually has that game. That's great. Nova Praxis. Now this is a crunchy Fate game, folks. This is Strands of Fate. This is like a derivative of like Fate 2 or something like that called Strands of Fate. This one's crunchy, boys and girls. When did this come out? Well, it's got the OGL license in it, so it was after 2000. It doesn't actually say. 2010. Yeah, so that was circa Fate 2, Fate 3. Anyways, Cole says, stunts are lame. They're just a fate point benefit without the fate point. That's kind of how I feel. Again, I want players. Here's the thing. A stunt requires, essentially, it doesn't require any, you don't have to explain why the stunt is applying. The stunt just applies.
Explaining why the stunt is applying is inherent in the stunt, right? Because you can't have a stunt that doesn't. It has to be limited to having an aspect in a certain situation. So.
I want people to be invoking their aspects and explaining to me and the table why this aspect applies in this situation. I like that. That's the world building. That's the character building. Yeah. That's the moment. That's what I like about the system so much. And then
I think.
And I agree with.
Are a way for a character to say that they are really, 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 they are the best of the best at this thing, this one very niche thing. And I think that can be powerful in certain
Right.
types of games. But
Whereas, as I've said before, in Fate particularly, I don't find that to be as compelling.
Yeah.
And as for Newt, now granted, there is some things we were talking about this a little bit, John, before we started, where I've always used poker chips for my Fate points, and I've actually never played Fate online, so I've only ever played Fate in person.
I have. It sucks.
And and one of the things that inevitably, because they're poker chips, whenever I play Fate, especially with people like Aaron Smith, they end up using them like poker chips. And when you're talking about these crazy stunts that allow to find, those still exist in my game, even though I don't use stunts. Those represent when a player goes, I know I'm about to do something that's kind of bullshit. I know I'm about to do something that's way too powerful and way too much of an ask. And that's why I'm going to pick up this stack of 5 Fate points. And I'm going to like put it in front of the GM as like a bribe. Like, I know I'm asking for a lot, but here's 5. We've literally had negotiations before where someone will want to do something and I'll go, that's going to cost at least 3. And then they'll go, 3's fair, but if I give you 4, could I also get this? And I'll be like, that'll cost you at least 5. And he's like, I'm willing to go 5, but I also want that. And I'll go, all right, deal. And then they slide over the 5. And we have just like enacted this narrative declaration shift, and it's all been done through this negotiation of Fate points, because that's the core meta currency. It's like we're like studio negotiating for how cool our game is about to be. Now, some people hate that. I absolutely love it.
That's the beauty of Fate. Is like, you don't like a part of it, throw it out.
That's true.
Like I said, it's a framework,
Yeah,
not a system.
right. There's no balance in the game as far as I can tell, anyways. But yeah, EOR turns just like haggling in Burning Wheel, right? When you're setting the obstacle, the consequences. I really love, setting position and effect in Blades in the Dark is something I also absolutely adore. And a lot of people find that clumsy and clunky, and I find it to be very, very satisfying.
One thing I did want to touch on, it kind of goes back to the concern about conflict being kind of boring, is not everything needs to be a conflict either. We kind of hinted at it, but there are challenges and contests, which I find are criminally underused.
Can you explain the differences, not just for the audience, but also for
me? Conflict is when you're actively trying to harm someone, whether it be mentally or physically.
Okay.
A challenge is when you're competing against passive opposition to accomplish a complex goal. Challenges, you can kind of think of like skill challenges in D&D, where like,
got it.
You're all kind of just doing overcome actions.
Do they still have like the pyramid?
What do you mean?
The skill challenge pyramid? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't think so. Basically, the way challenges work in Fate, is, at least in Fate Core, is that everyone finds their skill. You basically choose. You have like a complex action you're trying to do. You break that down into sub goals, and then you find someone who it would excel best at that one sub goal, and they roll an overcome action, and then you basically all have to succeed. It's very basic stuff. But a challenge might be one thing I like to use challenges for, and this is kind of a really, really niche thing. Like if I'm playing like a fantasy Fate game, right? And I like to have the idea of like an adventurous guild in my fantasy game, because I'm a weeb and I like anime stuff. But so the things you find, the quest you come out with an adventurous guild is going to be very mundane, boring shit. Like, oh, go, we're having an influx of goblins. Go, weed the forest of goblins, or go find a bunch of herbs that we're looking for. So I basically, instead of like actually turning those into stories, I just say do a skill challenge. You know what the task is at hand. You know what the actual quest is asking for. Break that down. How do you guys want to accomplish it? Who's rolling for what? Do you succeed or fail? Let's just get your money, get your bag, and let's move on. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't interesting. This just exists as a way to build your wealth, and so you can do more interesting stuff. That's how I use challenges. Admittedly, challenges are probably the least useful of the 3 in my experience. Contests, on the other hand, I find are incredibly useful. And contests are similar to conflicts, except you're a team versus another team trying to compete for a goal rather than trying to actively harm one another. And they also take place in exchanges similar to conflicts, but you're not using the attack and defend actions. You're just basically creating a bunch of advantages and also overcome actions. So way they differ in conflicts is you don't just get one action. You have one overcome action per turn in the exchange, but you're also allowed to do a create an advantage in your same turn. But if you fail that create an advantage, you lose your overcome action automatically. So it's a good example of a good use of contest would be, your stereotypical court proceeding. Somebody does something very stupid, gets set in front of a jury. You're trying to plead your case. The jury is trying to prosecute you. Let's do a contest to see whether you're guilty or not, kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of situations that social conflicts, depending on what you're trying to do, could also be social contests. So there's a lot of uses for these things that I think a lot of people just default to conflicts because that's what we're used to. But yeah, some might argue, why don't you just use the conflict rules for all the other two as well?
Yeah,
I personally think it adds a bit of diversity to things and kind of breaks the monotony of conflicts. So I enjoy them, but yeah.
I don't know
If you just have conflict after conflict after conflict, it does get kind of boring after a while. It's like,
this may break our Zoom, but it kind of did. But John, you should be able to see this whiteboard at least now.
Yep, I see it.
So and so can the audience, but it's a little bit awkward, but everyone can see it. I'm just doing this temporarily because there was this idea in earlier versions of Fate for this kind of I guess the audience, I guess they can't see that. Hold on a second, I gotta take.
Oh, by the way, there's also the idea of teamwork bonuses that exist in challenges and contests that don't exist in conflict, and those would be interesting as well.
So there was this idea of, and I'm drawing like a super basic one, and you could actually make this a lot more complex. But there was this idea of a skill challenge pyramid. Okay. And the idea is that, let's say that the party's going to do something, and depending on the type of action, let's imagine this is like, you need to convince the whatever, the Grand Vizier to grant you the magical red ruby so that you could do the thing. And the goal here is to fill in the top part of the pyramid. And to fulfill in the top part of the pyramid, you need to beat an obstacle, let's say with spin. You need to beat it by +2.
Okay.
And then to fill in these middle two, you need to beat it by +2. And then to fill in these bottom ones, you need to beat the obstacle by 1. So the players will describe what they're doing. And based on what they describe what you're doing, you're going to say, oh, okay, that's going to be difficulty. That's a really good idea. The difficulty for that is 1 or 0, right? And the player goes and makes a good check, and they fill in the +2. But then another player goes in and they make up a check, and they only beat it by +1. If somebody at any point during this challenge beats something by +3, you would fill in the top one. The challenge is done. They've been convinced. But if somebody fills it by +1, and then somebody beats it by +1, and then another person beats it by +1, you fill in the +2 because it has to roll up. It's almost like the consequences. Now, if anybody beats it, that will fill in the +3. Alternatively, like I said, from the very beginning, you could have had somebody come in, and somebody goes in and they make the check and they beat it by +1, and you fill this in. And then the next person crushes it and they beat it by +3. Challenge is over because they accomplished it. So it's a way of sort of like letting minor successes build towards a ultimate completion of the goal, but it's also at the same time gives somebody the option to kind of just beat the challenge with one check in one go. You're right, Ben. It's not they call it the Fate Pyramid. And the reason why I said that you can have fun with this is because there's different ways that you could structure this thing. Like, you could have something that looks more like this, and maybe there's 2 things at the top that need to be filled up, and maybe the divisions between them are like different, and so you need like more. You need fewer checks at the bottom, and then you need a bunch of checks here at the top, and then you only need a handful of checks here in the middle layer. And so it's a way of sort of like kind of structuring where challenges are going to be and what levers are checked off. You can also do things where like you can say, hey, this box and this box, when they're filled, give you some sort of additional bonus. Or they give you some sort of auxiliary bonus. Almost think of them almost like as a secondary goal to the main goal, which is to fill in these two boxes at the top. But so now if the players go and they beat the challenge right away, that's great, but they'll miss these like sort of secondary ones. And this is a great way because that allows the people who are really good at the skill to focus on trying to beat the challenge, and people who are maybe not as good at the skill as sort of maybe filling in some of the secondary or tertiary goals of a challenge. Now, obviously, this is something that requires a fair amount of work, and a little bit of prep.
In modern renditions of Fate, they basically just you have a goal you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
That goal requires you to do these things in order to accomplish it. And you basically just pick the person who's best suited for those things. You don't necessarily have to have one for everyone. Like if somebody's not, they do teamwork bonus, which, you can either, if you have the same skill, it's +1 or higher, you can just add +1 to it, or you can choose to instead create an advantage and try to add even more if you want. They probably felt that was a little too complex for what they were going for.
Well, Ben says, this is really terrible, but I can see why Derek likes it. It's so gamous, lol. It's like a triangular clock. Well, Ben, what it does, and I'm curious, Ben, what it does is it solves this problem. The party needs to convince an NPC. How do you handle that? Are you just going to let one person make a check and then move on? If so, that's awesome, and I actually completely agree with that. But a lot of people go, well, yeah, I kind of want everybody to participate. How do you do that in a meaningful way that makes sense? That isn't just that isn't just I'll create an advantage, you create an advantage, I'll create an advantage, you create an advantage. Now you go and overcome the situation. The whole
contest, you each get a turn in the exchange, and you each get to overcome the thing in a certain way. You also can do a creative advantage in addition to your overcome roll if you want. But like I said, if you fail the creative advantage, you lose out on the overcome action. But you have this concept of victory points kind of deal where, each, whether it's passive opposition or active opposition, you need to reach X number of points in order to succeed in the contest kind of deal. So that's kind of, I think it sounds like the pyramid thing, they kind of separated into challenges and contests and
maybe
kind of took pieces of both of them. I don't know. So I can see the inspiration of the pyramid thing in both contests and challenges partially. So,
but it is
also in Fate, clocks are flat. So
right. It is definitely gamifying it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And the reason it's gamifying it is so that everybody feels like they can make some sort of contribution and that, they were part of the victory. But those ultra gamist types of subsystems drive me up a wall. Well, they are games, they are games. So
Ben, we do have clocks in Fate. They're just in the form of stress tracks. So,
but I'm pretty sure Ben hates those too. Ben only likes clocks when they're like actually clocks. Like if they're ticking, like they're ticking down something, like a.
You can do that with a stress track. It's just not round, right? It's the line.
I'm curious, Ben, are you okay with like hit points in Fate or whatever they're called? I don't remember what it's called.
Stress boxes.
Yeah, stress, complications. Or is that too gamist? I'm like legit. I haven't read your deep dive, Ben, for Fate, so I'm legitimately wondering if it is. Right, because that's another way that you would beat the person, right? Which is where you keep stacking consequences on them through stress until they have all those complications that you can invoke against them, and then eventually they're taken out, right? Which means that you've convinced them.
You could also just use stress boxes as ticks, right? And just basically be a clock that's just flat. So like you have 3 boxes in the stress track. Each time you accomplish a goal, you tick one of the boxes or erase one of the boxes, whichever direction you're going.
Yeah. And that's basically like what you said, right? It's taking a clock and you're just kind of making it flat,
I'm almost positive the idea of clocks and Blaze in the Dark came from the stress tracks in Fate, because
Yeah, probably. I mean, well,
that was a very common.
technically the clocks in Blades in the Dark came from the clocks in Apocalypse World, which had these, which were called the shot clock, and it was literally just like it was 12 o'clock. Like the idea is that, like, you know, you're near midnight and that's going to be your character's death. That's how they used hit points. But Ben is consistent, and I applaud him for that. He says, I'm on the fence with the stress and complications. I have to see it in action, to be honest, but I was very critical of conflicts overall. And I don't think you're wrong, Ben, because again, I tend to want to avoid that type of stuff. I mean, again, I may be an apostate here, but when I run Fate and I haven't run it in a long time, but when I ran Fate at conventions, I didn't use initiative in, you know, conflicts. I kind of used, you know, powered by the Dungeon World style, and, you know, initiative, where it's not even popcorn initiative, where it's like, oh, you go. I would just go around and, you know, where does the spotlight need to go? And if somebody needs the spotlight, and then I'd be like, okay, they've set you up. Boom. You know, clearly you should be the next person to go because you're the next person to go, you know? And I think that
I'd argue in Fate, if you're having a ton of conflicts in a single session, you're probably doing it wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
Conflicts are supposed to be especially meaningful in Fate. So yeah.
I think the Ben says, yeah, the initiative sucks in Fate. No, initiative just sucks everywhere, people. That's, that's the truth of it.
Ben, you might find interesting. I know you haven't read Fate Condensed yet, but one of the small changes they made was popcorn initiative is now the default in Fate. They did away with the notice-based initiative.
I can at least applaud popcorn-based initiative. But yes,
which is another thing I find people struggle to grasp, by the way, that aren't used to it.
Popcorn.
Yeah, and in Fate, it's especially bad because if you have a typical group of players who just like to do all their turns and then let all the enemies go at the end, they're in for a bad time because these enemies can stack a ton of invokes on each other and just fucking hammer you. So
Javier, you are right. I mean, we just played a Torchbearer session last night, and, you know, everybody's trying to help or aid as best as they can, and it's not necessarily free, right? Because if they fail the check, then they're going to get the consequences. But sometimes it is a bit challenging to try to figure out, you know. And I appreciate players who don't try to like weasel their way into every check, because they're just like, yeah, it doesn't really make sense how I would help in this check. So I think that's one of the things where you maybe have to have a little bit of a superior player base as well. Ben says, I think if you were doing something like the Matrix, when Neo busts into the enemy HQ, being resolved as several small conflicts, but possibly better as a single multi-layered challenge. I struggle with it, Ben. I even struggle with it in Legend of the Five Rings, where I love the core system of setting a TN, the players choose an approach. Depending on what approach they choose, that modifies the TN. Players roll their dice, they pick their successes, they pick their opportunities, and we resolve that. And that is fundamentally what happens in a conflict. It just happens 75 times in a conflict because you're, you know, doing it over and over and over again. And I just wish there was a way, and that's one of the reasons I love Blaze in the Dark, is because I resolve almost everything that would be resolved as a conflict or an initiative order. I resolve almost all those things in Blaze in the Dark with a single group roll.
Remember too, in Fate, a conflict has to be actively harming someone. So if you're not doing that, then you should be having a conflict in the first place.
Right. And Ben and I are going on the tangent here, but yeah, absolutely, Ben. I mean, we did our entire campaign, 5 or 6 sessions, and 7 sessions, and I think we only had 2 conflicts. Right? We had one social conflict. What are they called? One combat and one, they're called conflicts. We had one combat challenge conflict, and we had one social conflict. An intrigue is what they call them. But yeah, so anyways, I agree with you, John, that this is not something you should be throwing out multiple times.
So if you think of a movie or a TV show, how many, battles actually happen in a single episode? You know what I mean?
Right. And the thing we have to distinguish is that when you guys run up and quickly take out the guards and then run into the compound, that's not a conflict. That's not a conflict. Yeah. That's not a conflict. That's just a skill check. Yeah. That's not even a battle. It's an obstacle. Those things don't have hit points. They don't have stress tracks. They don't have complications. That's just, they're
mooks. They call them. In fact.
But what do they? What's they don't use the term DC. What is it called in Fate?
Just passive opposition.
No, but like what do you call it? Like it's not. It's not the ob. It's not.
It's called the opposition. I think.
Is it the opposition value? So you say what do you say? You say it's opposition 2, opposition 3.
Well, you have the skill ladder where it's like +1 is average, +2 is
oh yeah, that's stupid
off
thing.
my head. I always use numbers, but like there's actually like adjective for each of the values. So it's like, oh, it's good opposition or it's great opposition.
Got it. You're supposed to use the adjective, and then everyone's like nudge,
whatever,
nudge,
man,
wink, wink. You actually mean +3.
It's +2 opposition, man. It's like I think Ben actually liked that, if I remember correctly from his deep dive. He liked adding the adjective to it. But
I mean, at least it sounds more, you know.
It's just hard. It's like it's one of those things. It's like I got to remember it, right? And it's
I don't fully remember it. Maybe there's some other things here, but Mindjammer has several variant ladders, but they are all good. Yeah, I mean, Fate has always been very like use whichever one works for you groups, you know. But he does prefer the descriptive text over saying numbers.
The stress tracks is where he draws a line.
Well, no, he doesn't want to use the stress tracks. But so I agree. I mean, the problem, here's the problem I have with conflicts. This is more of a generic problem for anything, by the way. This is not a Fate problem. This is more of a generic role-playing game problem. So welcome, John, to the Philosophy Hour. We tend to, I'm going to read what EU Arta here says. I think of conflicts as lenses. The more important the scene is, the more you'd like to magnify it and get into the details. And I think that's true for so many game systems. Here's the problem I have. Those are supposed to be the most engaging, tense, drama-filled scenes in our story. But conflict rules, no matter what game you're playing, almost never make them that. They almost always slow it down. It becomes very fiddly. It becomes long. There's long pauses. There's lots of rules looks up. There's rolling initiative, determining initiative, figuring it out. And it's just like you kill the very momentum that you were building up to get to this point with your system to focus in on it. And now nobody gives a shit. And or worse, you've turned it into a strategic miniature board game in like D&D or Pathfinder 2 sense. And it seems so backwards to me. And I don't know what a good solution is. I get that there's this desire to be like the final, we want the final whatever to be more than just a single skill check, which is what we've been doing the whole freaking game.
What's interesting to me is that...
But I don't want it to take an hour.
Yeah. I find it interesting that you think that because in my experience... with a good Fate group, Fate is the one game where the conflicts are the best and the most eventful and the most, engaging parts of the game. So I would say that maybe after you get a few more conflicts under your belt with a group that really gets the system, you might reconsider that idea. But
yeah, I don't know.
Is a tough. I will say that with a bad group, I will 100% like if the group isn't bought into the system and really is aligned mentally on what their like the goals of the system are and how to play it, I will agree that Fate conflicts are extremely bland and lackluster. So maybe it goes back to your original question of does it require a certain level of skill? I still don't know if skill is the right word I'd use, but I definitely think it takes a certain type of person to really.
Yeah, for sure.
And maybe it's that Fate is a game for GMs. Maybe that's the way I would put it. If you get a group of GMs playing Fate together, I think that's, in my experience, that's the best.
Because everybody wants to be a storyteller, right? Yeah. I mean, you are right about that. I talk about this all the time. I think the modern RPG has made players so fucking lazy. And they're so entitled, and I'm not necessarily talking about you, but maybe I am. You've become it's a passive form of entertainment, and this is not that. Fate is definitely not a passive form of entertainment, right? You have to you have to engage. You have to fight for your character. You have to fight for your character's aspects. You have to fight for your character's identity and themes.
If you don't have a group of players that is very engaged with the game, then this is going to immediately fall flat on its face. Like,
yeah, Agreed. And some people are going to bounce off of that because, like like I was saying before, they don't want to have to validate or explain or convince the group why they can use this ability in this scene. They just want to be able to use the ability. And it's not because they're bad people. It's just because they're lazy and they're here for just like, I didn't come here to like think and engage. I just kind of came here to sit back and eat some snacks and, be like, oh, cool. Cool, and that's not necessarily what everybody's going for. We do have a lot of people agreeing with the conflict system's very ornate, and EU Artist says there has to be a middle ground somewhere. I know that's like the thing, and then even Ben says this is why I like either Lasers and Feelings, which is a micro light RPG by John Harper, or Rollmaster, which is famous for being like the most complicated thing of all time. Stuff in between is just not my jam. Beowulf, I don't necessarily mean that combat needs to be like one roll and everyone's dead. Like that's also not what I mean. So also opposed rolls have nothing to do with it. That doesn't fix anything. Hey, you know what we should do? We should make randomness and then multiply it by randomness, and that'll make it better. No, it doesn't. It doesn't do it. It's still just a random roll. Let's see.
What are your thoughts on zones?
That's a great question. In Fate, love them. Because it's very easy to just give them aspects.
Yeah.
It gives a little bit of tactical component to a game that maybe cares about it. But again, it gets to the question of how tactical should your game of Fate really be?
Yeah.
And
I personally only use them for major differences. Like, for instance, there was in one of the games I played, they were trying to infiltrate a building and get to the top floor of the building. I basically had a zone for outside, and I had a zone for lower floors inside, and then I had a zone for upper floors inside. And like, because the combat, started when they were still outside, but they still needed to get to the top. So like, there was still the active goal of getting up to the top.
I think in most of my Fate games, I think usually there's like 2 zones. Like there's like here and there. Those are the 2 zones, here and there.
That's normal for me as well. But I don't know. In the examples like they give in the book, there's like, you're in a storehouse and you got to climb the ladder to get up.
Yeah, right. That's taking it way too far. I completely agree. I mean, again, it's tempting to want to be like, oh, this is the balcony, and the balcony has these 3 aspects, and then you can make your way over to the corrugated, metal roof, and that has these 2 aspects. And it's
my rule of thumb when coming up with zones is like, how different are these things at like an aspect level? Like, is this place on fire and this place isn't? Okay, they probably make sense as separate zones, but like,
So Ben says, one of the things I like about Mindjammer, which is a sci-fi, I think it's based off
Fate does extremely well, by the way.
I think it's based off a British
Fate
sci-fi
show. Great at sci-fi and other over-the-top things.
The only Fate game I ran for my home campaign was a superhero game, and it worked awesome.
Yeah.
So I know this is going to be kind of dramatic, but I think it works great for sci-fi. I think it works awesome for like modern espionage, spies. It works great for like cyberpunk, Shadowrun. I think it works cool for superheroes. I kind of think it works crappy for fantasy.
I think the only way it works for fantasy is if you're doing like anime fantasy where everything's over the top. You have like a giant story you're trying to tell. It does not work for dungeon crawling. It does not work for your typical D&D, like hopping from one quest to the other kind of thing. So.
Right. But so Mindjammer gets into the crunchy simulations thing about that Ben cares about, but things like technology levels, gravity, and repairing stuff, but it doesn't add to combat. Well, that's also again, I think there's a default assumption that people want crunch is in combat, and you're like, no, maybe I want combat to be over really, really quick, but I really want to get into the nitty gritty about the
sociopolitics of cross planet.
or the gravity, or the gravity levels of this planet. Ben says, Fate is not made for your small personal drama. I do find that Fate tends to get a little bit out of pocket, and I think one of the reasons why it does that is because having that kind of narrative currency is very powerful. Most,
and you want it to matter, right? If you're actively spending a resource to do something, you want that something to have impact.
Well, I think Fate can feel very empowering to players because they're so used to nothing ever going their way, and it's like you have this cool moment and your character falls on their face and it's just embarrassing, or like the game rules actively discourage you from doing the cool pulpy genre appropriate thing, like you're entering the thing and you're like, awesome, this is a cool opportunity. I'm gonna jump onto the tapestry, slice it with my sword, and swing down and engage the villain that way. And everyone's looking at you like, he's only 25 feet away. You should just take a move action. Like it's gonna be way easier, and you're not gonna have to like make checks. And there's just a chance that you're gonna fail, and you're just gonna probably fall, and it's just gonna be embarrassing for all of us. You're gonna end up wasting your whole turn. And then they're like, fine, I just walk down the stairs. That's D&D. That's Pathfinder. Pathfinder. In Fate, it's like, hell yeah, like that's the game for that sort of big, over the top, swashbuckling pulp action type things.
I mean, there's like the evolution of the Fate player, right? It's like they come from a D&D background, they enter it, they're like, you tell them, oh, you can do you don't need feats, you can do anything. It's like, really? But then they're like, in play, they're like, oh, I can do anything. And then like they try to do something just completely off the wall crazy, and you're like, sure. And they're just like, oh, I can do anything. And that's when it clicks for them. And that's, as a GM who's experienced with Fate, that's one of the most satisfying things in the world, to see, just watch the click in their head and see the expression on their face when they finally realize, oh, this is how it works. And then
yeah, absolutely. Beowulf says, run up the blade. I have my limit, Beowulf. So Nutrimancer said something. He says, I do it, he's quoting. He says, I do a somersault over them and snap their neck. Nutrimancer, this is, for me, I've run games of Dungeon World, Blades in the Dark, Fate, many others at like cons and stuff. And one of the first things that a lot of players will do, usually asshole D20 players, and I could have just said D20 players, who try to, like, when I'm like, oh, you can do anything you want in this game, it's not like D&D, you don't need feats and the skills. Usually there's some asshole player who tries to do some variation of that. And because I don't care, because it's definitely don't care, it's a one shot, but also there's no XP, there's for killing things, there's no challenge rating, anything. I usually go, oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's kind of, let's say we're playing Blades in the Dark or something like that. And I go, that sounds kind of risky, not desperate. This is totally fine. Risky, would you say what I said? And they're like, yeah. And they roll, and I go, yeah, totally. You flip over their neck, you flip over their body, they spin around, you grab them in their neck, their neck snaps, and they fall to the ground in a heap. And they're kind of like shocked. Because they're like, wait, you mean I just did that thing? And I'm like, yeah, you did. And they're like, you didn't stop me? And I'm like, no, I didn't. They're like, yeah, but I just made a skill check and I took out that villain, or I took out that monster, or I took out that. Yeah, guys, I thought it looked pretty sweet. What did you all think? I thought it looked pretty sweet. And they're like, I don't understand what's happening right now. Like they're so off put. They're just like, what is going on? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. I don't care. Don't you understand? I don't care.
Welcome to the dark side.
Yeah, welcome to the dark side. It's not about that. It's not about that, trying to do that type of thing. He says, actually, there's a feat for somersaulting. You got to roll a D20 and whatever. Yeah, exactly, Ben. The difference between can I do X versus how do I do X? Oh, that's so well said, Ben, because when people are asking, can I do something? And then, as Wuppelstein says, feats are a list of things that you can't do versus a list of things you can do. In a sense, feats are basically saying, feats are a way of the game saying, by default, all of these options are illegal, or at least very, very, very difficult to do, and probably going to result in your failure because I'm going to give you such a big penalty, or they're going to have such a high cost, that basically you can only do what the core rules tell you to do. And then when you suddenly say, like, well, okay, it's not about what you can do, it's about, okay, cool, you want to do that thing, let's talk about it. What are the risks?
How do we? What can the rules do to help you accomplish?
Right, and so in that case, when a rules engine supports me in putting you in a position to then end up making a roll, we can all agree to the terms and conditions. Right, it ends up becoming a negotiation. And, you know, for me, I'm like, I don't really care about this guy. He's not really that important to the party. So he's not worth a lot to me. So I don't really care what you do to him. You know, like he's not worth that much to the story. He's not worth that much to what's going on. And in fact,
he's definitely not worth dragging down the session by doing a long form combat. Like
I mean, this is it's not necessarily a Fate story, but we were playing a superhero game. We were playing superheroes, and there was it was kind of over the top, and it was Christmas time, and there was a mad scientist who was, you know, a jaded toy maker who had been fired, and he was called the Toy Maker, and he had made, like, you know, a legion of nutcracker soldiers who had taken the city hostage, and then he made like a huge animatronic Frosty the Snowman, who was like, you know, kind of like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, you know, destroying through the city, and he was controlling it all from his thing. And the heroes, one of which was played by Smith, his character was like a Rambo, gun-toting Rambo, but but also had a katana, right? Straight out of the 80s, right? Where everything was a ninja or like a Rambo. And they like describe like their plane or their helicopter or something like that, like going over his headquarters. He's got like a glass cupola or like skylight, and he like swings out on a rope, you know, swinging down with one arm, machine gun in the other one. He crashes through and like Smith is describing this. He's like, I break through the glass and I'm slamming out, and I see him on there. And as I'm sliding down the rope, you know, fire and explosions are around me. You know, I put a 3-round burst right into this guy, and I'm like, awesome, you know, make a check. And he's like, yeah. And this is like the final battle. And he's like, all right, what? I'm like, yeah, you hit. He's like, yeah. He's like, what happens? Like 3 bullets hit him relatively close to the center of mass. He's like, all right, I land, and my sword comes out. And I'm like, no. He's like, oh God, no. Oh, you shot me, you son of a bitch. Oh, all I do is make toys. All I wanted to do was like stop Christmas. What are you doing? Please, fucking call ambulance. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. Sure. I guess I'll get right on that. Medic, can we get a medic here? Can we get a medical evac? He's like, please help. And that was the final fight. The final fight was he just.
And I bet you guys ended that session thinking you just wrote the script to Die Hard 3.
Oh, right. Everyone was like that. Everyone was like, that was the coolest. Or they were laughing. And the point is, it was very memorable, as opposed to me being like, he has 950 hit points, and you're gonna have to hit him 75 times before he finally goes like, I've been defeated. It was way more. I'm like, no, he's just a guy. He's not a superhero. He's just the toy maker. You shot him with your P90 rifle or whatever. He's done. He's done for.
Has Bob tried Fate? Because I know he likes beer and pretzels stuff, and I can't think of anything more beer and pretzels.
I think Bob would really. I think new Bob. Current Bob, I think would
Bob
really
2.0.
Yeah, Bob 2.0. I think would really like Fate. Well, because Bob 1.0, right? He played D&D, and then he played Pathfinder, and he loved the feats and the stuff like that. And now Bob's like, I can't remember 90% of that stuff in that character sheet, and I don't even want to. So I think like a Fate Accelerated or Fate Condensed, I think Bob would do really great with that. And I also think, again, I think for someone like Bob, having like things like the approaches from Fate Accelerated Edition would really just, that's what he needs to lock in, you know, and just go, oh, I want to do this thing forcefully because that's my high number. So I guess I better describe how I'm doing this thing forcefully. Because like, you know, because the GM goes like, well, you know, what does sneaking in forcefully look like, you know? And you're like, I don't know. You know, maybe there isn't a way to describe this. Maybe I'll have to use something that isn't my best stat because that's what fits the fiction. You know, and it's like for Bob, that's great. He's like, those are the training wheels that I need to role play. And
how many likes on this video would it take for you guys to do a Fate Accelerated?
Oh my God,
or something?
I have no idea. Well, we'd have to play it online. That's the only thing that's unfortunate, you know. But again, you know, I mean, as I was telling you at the beginning of the stream,
I'm trying to help you out. Man.
I'm not working. I'm not working anymore. So unfortunately, you know, everybody else is. So I don't necessarily have all these people to signed up. But yeah, I mean, you know, I maybe I can like. Bob's going to be at Origins along with some patrons, and that's going to be in person, and that's in June. That's in June in Columbus, and maybe I can run a Fate game or something, and and we can record it or something for the Patreon or something like that. That maybe we'll do that because he might have kind of fun for that. I've never played a superheroes game with Bob, and Bob loves comic books. He loves superheroes, and I think he would be really, really, really into that. And yeah, there's cool superhero games that we have back here, like Sentinel Comics, which is a really great game. We did our first look of it, last year. Awesome game. But it's complicated. It has rules. Like, I'm not about that life. I want, and then like the approaches will be like Marvel, DC, Image. Like, it's just like, wait, what? It's just the different comic types. Tim says LEL chapter ? Would be sick to play in. Tim is a frequent contributor to our LEL verse. That's the Lake Erie League, for those of you who don't know our series of comic books that we have done over the years. Tim's famous character was the Shadow Fang, a not total ripoff of Batman, but with wolves instead of bats. All right.
Hot take, but the Green Arrow is a better Batman than Batman.
Ooh. Okay, so let's break it down. He's rich. They're both rich. They both
back for vengeance.
They're both for vengeance. They both use gadgets and tools that are a little cheesy.
They have no actual superpowers.
They have no actual superheroes.
It's literally the same character in a different costume.
So what makes the Green Arrow better than Batman?
I just think his circumstances are more interesting than growing up well, not growing up, but being trained effectively on a deserted island kind of deal. And also he seems more interesting as a character than Batman. Batman's just like a brooding guy.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point. He's the edgelord master,
I don't know. I just think the stories are
Oliver's
same,
a little bit more,
depth to the Green Arrow.
I don't know that I like either character. See, I'm the weirdo who likes Superman. I find Superman to be a very compelling character. People are like, he's so boring.
Yeah, I'm not a Superman fan.
Right. I like Superman. I like, but yeah. And then now people are discussing arrows. All right, but can we all agree that the Green Arrow is better than Hawkeye?
Oh, for sure.
There's a great SNL sketch where Jeremy Renner was on SNL. And he's playing Hawkeye, and then other SNL cast members are playing different members of the Avengers, and they're doing their thing, and then Hawkeye's in the middle of battle, and he's then Captain America's like, Hulk, you take out those aliens, and Iron Man, you go blast the ships, and he's like, Hawkeye, he goes, sorry guys, I'm out of arrows, and he's like, what? He's like, I mean, this is the only thing I do, and I mean, I only brought like 10, so. I guess I'm just gonna go home. I don't have anything to do. But Boothby says, I've come to appreciate the goody good Superman and Captain America outlook the older I get and the less jaded I wish I were. Same. I mean, as a kid, I did collect Superman comics when I was a kid, but I loved Marvel. I loved X-Men. I loved The Edge. Superman I collected because I thought it was, a cool thing to collect, but I didn't really love it. I loved the Death of Superman series. That was really cool. But I hated Captain America. I thought Captain America was so boring. Now I love Captain America. I love Captain America and I love Superman. So, anyways, Akenzo confirms. So John, when there was a question in chat, when are you running Fate for the patrons? That's what they want to know. When are you going to run a game? When are you going to run a game on the Knights of Last Call Patreon?
As I kind of mentioned to you before this, I have been consumed by this restoration project, and it is ending soon. So hopefully I have more time soon.
John likes Fate and fast cars. Is that a good way to describe it?
I do, once I have some free time, I do actually want to run at least a one shot for some people.
John, you would have really loved when we did our Scum and Villainy campaign, which is like Blaze in the Dark, but in space. And it basically turned into, they got involved in an underground illegal race circuit, and they were trying to basically commit crime and win street races to soup up their ship so that they could enter this the once in a lifetime system wide race. It was almost like the Tour de France of
race wars.
And save up enough money. It was basically Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, awesome.
but them souping up their engines and like trying to
That's awesome.
like they very quickly were like, it's like, oh, I wonder what the campaign's going to be about. It's going to be about them. Are they going to be like the Rebel Alliance and they're going to try to fight against the Imperial hegemony? And are they going to try to? Nope. They want they want street races in space, and that is exactly
awesome.
what they got.
Before my life got consumed by this project, I was actually working on I wouldn't say it's Fate because it changes a bit about the system. So it's definitely based on Fate, but not Fate proper, I guess. But it's I don't know, I'm a big fan of the anime Initial D. And I tried to like kind of encapsulate that genre in an RPG, basically. So I kind of bastardized contests and conflicts to create a race and use stress tracks to like be countdown tracks for what leg of the race you're on, kind of deal. So it ends up being pretty fun. Had one of your patrons, London, was the editor for that. At least
nice.
Pass. So
very cool. Yeah, London.
Hopefully I can get back to that because I'd love to release that at some point. It's fairly succinct and short. It's nothing,
Yeah, London had to step away from the Patreon to go deal with some real life stuff, but we miss him. I hope he comes back. He didn't die, Beowulf. Rip London. he said he hopes to come back someday. He's just got to take care of some business. Beowulf.
I was just telling you before this that I've generally been pretty burnt out on RPGs.
Yeah, you did say that. And again, I don't blame you to a certain extent, and I think it's because there's definitely a cult of the new. Like nowadays, it's all about like, new RPG this, Kickstarter this, premium edition this, dice this, bonus this, and then a new game's coming out, and a new game's coming out, and a new game's coming out, and people get this kind of FOMO, and they want to just like be aware of every game, and I'm certainly guilty of it because of this channel, right? I'm so exposed to so many new games, and it could be you're so concerned about what RPG you're going to play next that you don't really appreciate the RPG that you're playing, or you're sitting there going like, oh, which RPG should I pick? And then you'd end up not playing an RPG for, 2 or 3 months because you're trying to figure out which one would be the right one for me to play, Yeah.
And it's just like, I was telling you, like, I don't feel like most of these RPGs really do anything innovative anymore. I feel like it's just
shots fired,
derivations of the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, there are some truly unique RPGs out there, but most people say those are too weird and I don't want to play them.
But I feel like, and I mentioned this in one of your streams, I feel like in order to stand out in the sea of RPGs, you have to get really weird in order to separate yourself. And then that inherently limits your market because the weirder you are, the more niche you are. So I don't know.
Better create another D&D killer. I agree with
this. I released this car RPG. It's like nobody's gonna buy this.
Right.
I mean, sure, it's cool that I released the book, but it's like,
oh no, like if you did a Kickstarter and you had a good way of advertising it and marketing it. Obviously, you don't have like a YouTube channel or something like that. But if you got, you'd probably get a couple hundred people who'd be like,
it's definitely not financially viable.
I'll check it out. But yeah, definitely not
for fun more than anything.
Correct.
And I think that's how most RPGs should stay. They should stay like just.
Well, there's itch. Thing. I mean, there's itch.io where small independent people produce their small independent stuff. I mean, that's where Attack to Quest is. That's where Trespasser is. Who knows if those games will ever actually get a Kickstarter or get published? But at least the creators, the creators are doing their thing. Granted, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot of stuff from that. But Beowulf, I just want to say, you and I very rarely ever agree, but here we agree completely. I agree with you 100%. Number one, I love that movie. Number two, I loved him as Superman. I thought he was great. Brendan Routh.
Which I didn't see.
Superman Returns.
Which Superman was that?
So that's the one with Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor.
Okay.
I thought that was great. That was like everything I wanted in a Superman movie. Let's see here.
Yes, I do plan to run a Fate game at some point.
Okay.
I just don't know when. My life is chaos right now. So
Ben says, I'd rather have a world with 1 million super weird games than the 4 monolithic systems that run the world now. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about a game system, and people being familiar with it and getting to use that, so that they don't
I have
spend
no
time
problem. In fact, I prefer there being tons of different systems that focus on different things. My gripe is that there's a bunch of systems that do the same thing, and like there's not enough there's not enough innovation in the systems to merit being a new system. It's like, I don't know, Starfinder kind of is one of like, it's freaking D&D in space, man. Like there's nothing innovative it does really. Like it adds some new races, some new weapons, but like it's the same system. Like did it really constitute having an entirely new line of products? I don't know, maybe, but
Yeah, I mean those are some good questions, and yet if they made something new and different, people would be turned off by that. So
yeah, I don't know.
There's
a reason I'm not a RPG.
Yeah, I will say this amongst anything else, if there's for no other reason, Fate Accelerated Edition or Condensed, very smart short book. It's either free or nearly free. I think it's worth reading and maybe trying to play once or twice, even if you're not really sure what you're doing, just because this is a foundational game to so many different ideas that are now sort of taken for granted and are sort of integrated into the modern day indie RPG. That this and most of us have played pretty simulationist heavy games, and most of us have definitely played very gamist heavy games. But this is sort of like the de facto narrative mechanical heavy game, and so I definitely think that the books are worth the read. I mean, I think they're gorgeous books. They're made very well, and they're designed to be hacked. I mean, right alongside your Fate Core, right, you have the Fate System Toolkit, and this book here is all about terraforming your game into making it your unique version of Fate, which is pretty cool.
There's also this Fate Space Toolkit, which is out of print and criminally so, because in my opinion, it's the best Fate book that exists.
I don't know that, but I don't own that book.
I have one, but ridiculous. I don't know why out of all the Fate books that are out of print, it's that one. But
Ben giving Fate Core worth the read for just the GM advice alone. 10 out of 10 GM book in my opinion. So there you go. That's pretty good.
Even if you bounce off of Fate and you don't like it, John's promise, I guarantee you will find some mechanic or idea or something that you will take to other games, and you will incorporate other games, or your money back, all $0 of it. But.
Yeah. So I just quickly flipped open, and I remember what I really liked about the GM section of this book is they have these great sidebars, and they're talking to you as a GM, and they're sometimes scolding you, but they're very it makes you think about why you're doing the things that you're doing in a game, and sometimes you might be doing something and you're not doing it for the reason that you think you're doing it, or you're doing it for a bad reason. And there's this, like I said, there's this knee-jerk reaction that so many people have who've played nothing but like D&D and Pathfinder, where they're like, no, I can't let my players do things and change things and have fun. Like it has to be the way that it's written in the game. And Fate is sort of a way of sort of stepping away from that. So
Fate is not a game of dogma. It is definitely a pragmatic game for sure.
Correct. Yes. It's very much about like, let's figure out a way for you to, to make something happen. Yeah, I agree. I mean, a good GM with inspiring ideas, offering interesting choices and good pacing can make any game great. That's more or less true. I agree with you, Daryl. I do think some
of a GM.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, obviously, sometimes I think systems can help with that. But yeah. All right, John, you got somewhere to be. I got somewhere to be. We're gonna wrap this up here on Sunday night, a little bit after 9:00. Big, huge shout out to everyone who came in tonight and hung out with us, but especially big shout out to Wolpelstein and Javier for the massive tip. That was awesome. Filled up that goal by himself. So really, really appreciate that. Love it, especially for a Sunday night stream. Love to see that we can get 50, 60 people, 65 people on a Sunday night just to talk about talk about Fate. Thank you, John, for coming on and hanging out. We'll get you back on before episode 500.
Every 250 episodes, I'm here.
Yeah, every time. Listen, at some point, if we ever set up a situation where we're running Fate, on this, maybe we be remotely or something like that, maybe we can get you to come on and show us your stuff.
Sure, yeah.
But
I will say Fate sucks running online. So
there's something about being in person and writing the note. I mean, it should be very
Fate
good.
Is
like
a prop heavy game,
right? But
like having the note cards.
That's why I think if you had like more like a Miro or like a whiteboard or like something that's more used for like project management, I think that would be way more interesting. Because then it's like you can just use little white note, stick it notes or like Albert Rodeo or something really simple. I think using like a VTT like Roll20 or Foundry is going to be really, really tough.
I actually did run one Fate game on Foundry and it was pretty rough, but
yeah.
But the whiteboard idea sounds interesting. I'll try that.
Because for me, it's all about the physical props. It's all about little poker chips. I mean, TTS would be ideal, Beowulf, but TTS has its own problems. But for me, it's all about physically manipulating the chips, and I'm a big fan of that. So
note cards are huge in Fate. Like I can't even stress.
Ben says table cam for the win. Yeah, Ben just has a top-down mounted cam.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea.
It's a great idea if you can freaking rig it up and have the space for it and do all that other stuff. But
there's been a huge influx of people interested in using Fate for solo play. I have not tried it. I'm not sure how it would work, but people seem to really dig it. If anyone tries that, let me know how it goes.
I am on the record and will never not be on the record that I think solo RPGs you just go masturbate. Like it's
I
way
agree.
more fun,
find
and
the concept of them strange, but
I find it strange.
Very popular right
They're
now,
very popular. If you like them, more power to you. I just personally,
but if you do try it and you try to use Fate with it, let me know what you did and what worked out, what didn't, because I'm curious.
Yeah, drop comments below. We'll take a look at them, and we'll be back next week again. So now that I've officially been off of work for a week and some change, starting to figure out my new schedule, and kind of figure out how I'm going to do and what I'm going to do. All I can say is Tuesdays and Thursdays are going to remain much like they have, where we're going to be streaming, talking about systems, doing deep dives, doing first looks, doing philosophical stuff about game masters and players. But I'm going to try to add in some additional streams there, especially potentially during the day, because that's when I have the most time now, because I formerly was working. So expect to maybe see some more EU-friendly streams, maybe even some more Australia, New Zealand-friendly streams. I may try some new stuff out that I normally wouldn't have done. I wouldn't want to use one of my Tuesdays or Thursday streams to play Final Fantasy, but now maybe I will, or to do a reaction video to somebody else's hot take video, and give my thoughts on their thoughts. Normally, I would
find
subscribe,
like, hit the bell.
Yeah, subscribe, like, hit the bell.
Doesn't have to go back to work.
That's right. That's right. And if you really want to, throw support to us, by all means, come check us out on the Patreon, patreon.com/nicelesscall. We'll be back next week, in part to talk about Northern Reaches. We're going to have some more guests on, some more patrons who are going to be talking about Northern Reaches Season 3, which is kicking off April 21st.
If you are on the Patreon and you're in the Discord and you have questions about Fate, tag me. I'm happy to chime in. I love talking about it. So
yes, your @ is just @John, right? John B.
I think it's @Nerd with Dice.
Oh, Nerd with Dice. You're right.
I think John's in my name, so I think it'll still come up.
Yeah, but you're right. I think it's Nerd with Dice John B or something like that is what it is. Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, audience, and thank you, Javier and Whipple, for your support. And thank all of the rest of you. If you didn't click the bell, thank you too. You still deserve it. Take care. We'll see you next time on Nice Last Call.
Ciao, guys.
Peace out, everybody.